The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Ravenwood Cemetery as Dr. Elena Reeves pulled her car up to the rusted iron gates. She turned off the engine and sat for a moment, taking in the sight before her. Old gravestones tilted at odd angles, some nearly swallowed by the earth, others standing tall but weathered by centuries of rain and wind. Ancient trees with gnarled branches formed a natural canopy over the grounds, their leaves rustling in the breeze as if whispering secrets to one another. Elena was not easily spooked. As a paranormal researcher with 15 years of experience, she had visited supposedly haunted locations all over the world. Most turned out to be nothing more than old buildings with creaky floors and overactive imaginations at work. But Ravenwood was different. The reports that crossed her desk couldn't be ignored, not when they came from level-headed locals, tourists with no knowledge of the cemetery's history, and even a few fellow researchers who had packed up and left before completing their studies. Most haunted cemetery in the world, Elena muttered to herself, checking her recording equipment one last time. We'll see about that. She stepped out of her car, the gravel crunching beneath her boots. The air felt different here, heavier, somehow as if the boundary between this world and whatever came after was paper-thin. A chill ran down her spine despite the mild spring weather. The small village of Blackthorn lay just down the hill, its stone cottages and single church spire visible from where she stood. According to her research, the locals rarely visited the cemetery after sunset. Some refused to come at all. The village council had hired a groundskeeper, but even he only worked during daylight hours. As if summoned by her thoughts, an elderly man appeared on the path ahead, leaning on a wooden walking stick. His face was deeply lined, his eyes sharp, beneath bushy white eyebrows. "You must be Dr. Reeves," he called out, his voice carrying a slight accent Elena couldn't quite place. "I'm Thomas Kovich. The council told me to expect you." Elena smiled, extending her hand. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Kovich. Thank you for agreeing to show me around." The old man didn't take her hand. Instead, he glanced at the sky. "We don't have much daylight left. Best to start now if you want to see the grounds." "Of course," Elena said, lowering her hand and reaching for her equipment bag instead. "I've read quite a bit about Ravenwood, but nothing compares to seeing it firsthand. Reading and seeing are very different things," Kovich replied, already turning to walk through the gates. "And experiencing is something else entirely." Elena followed him into the cemetery, noting how his limp seemed to disappear once they crossed the threshold, as if the place gave him strength. Or perhaps he was simply more comfortable here than meeting strangers. "Ravenwood dates back to the 1600s, Kovich explained as they walked. "The oldest graves are near the center, where the ground is highest. Those who could afford it wanted to be buried there, closer to heaven, they believed." Elena took photos as they moved deeper into the cemetery. "And the reports of unusual activities? When did those begin?" Kovich paused, using his stick to point toward a section where several large family crypts stood. "People have always spoken of strange happenings here. My grandfather was groundskeeper before me and his father before him. The stories go back as far as the cemetery itself." "What kind of happenings?" Elena pressed, turning on her digital recorder. "Lights where no lights should be. Voices when no one is speaking. The feeling of being watched followed." Kovich shrugged. "The usual ghost stories." But Elena could tell from his tone that there was more. "And the unusual ghost stories?" The old man's eyes met hers, searching, as if deciding whether she was worthy of the truth. "My grandfather once told me he saw a funeral procession at midnight. A full procession with mourners and pallbearers carrying a coffin. He recognized the people. All of them had been dead for years." Kovich looked away. "He followed them to an open grave, but when they lowered the coffin, he saw himself inside it. 3 days later, he fell ill. Would have died if my grandmother hadn't found him in time." A crow cawed loudly from a nearby tree, making Elena jump. "That's quite a story," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just a story," Kovich replied, though his eyes said otherwise. "This way. I'll show you the weeping corner." They approached an area where several stone angels stood guard over graves. Unlike the others, these statues were remarkably well preserved. their features clear despite the centuries. Local legend says these angels cry real tears on certain nights, Kovach said, mostly around the death anniversaries of those buried beneath them. Has anyone ever tested the liquid? Elena asked. One researcher tried about 20 years ago, collected samples in little vials. Kovach pointed to a grave with a particularly sorrowful-looking angel. By morning, the vials were empty, not broken, not spilled, empty. He left the same day. The sun was setting now, painting the cemetery in shades of orange and purple. Shadows stretched across the ground like reaching hands. We should head back, Kovach said suddenly. It's getting dark. Actually, I was hoping to set up some equipment for overnight monitoring, Elena replied, pulling out a small infrared camera from her bag. Just a few motion sensors, temperature gauges, that sort of thing. Kovach frowned. The council didn't mention you staying after dark. It's standard procedure for my research. Don't worry, I won't disturb anything. Elena smiled reassuringly. Unless you believe the stories about what happens here at night? The challenge in her voice was clear, but instead of being provoked, Kovach looked almost sad. I've worked here for 43 years, Dr. Reeves. I've seen things that made me question everything I know about life and death. Things that would make your scientific equipment short-circuit just trying to record them. He tapped his walking stick against a nearby headstone. This place has rules, not the kind humans make, older rules. A sudden gust of wind sent leaves swirling around their feet, and Elena felt goosebumps rise on her arms. What kind of rules? She asked quietly. Don't come at night. Don't disturb the graves. And never ever follow if someone calls your name. Kovach turned, heading toward the gates. But you'll do what you want. They always do. Elena watched him go, torn between scientific curiosity and the unmistakable feeling of dread that had settled in her stomach. The cemetery looked different now as darkness crept in. The gravestones like teeth in an open mouth, the trees like hands reaching for the sky. She set up her equipment quickly, placing cameras at spots Kovach had pointed out as paranormal hotspots. The temperature was dropping rapidly, her breath visible in small clouds as she worked. By the time she finished, night had fully fallen and the only light came from her flashlight and the nearly full moon overhead. Back at her car, Elena hesitated. The sensible thing would be to return to her hotel in the village, monitor the equipment, remotely, and come back in the morning. That's what her colleagues would advise. Instead, she grabbed her sleeping bag, a thermos of coffee, and her notebook. She'd stay just inside the gate, she decided, close enough to leave if necessary, but present if anything happened. As she settled in for the night, the old stones and silent graves watched, and somewhere, deeper in the cemetery, something else watched too. Patient and curious about this new visitor who dared to stay when the sun abandoned the dead to darkness. The first hour passed quietly. Elena reviewed her notes, occasionally, glancing at her laptop that showed feeds from the cameras. Nothing unusual, just a peaceful if eerie graveyard at night. Then her equipment began to malfunction. First, the temperature readings jumped erratically, from near freezing to summer hot in seconds. Then the motion sensors triggered one, after another, though the camera feeds showed nothing moving. Finally, her laptop screen flickered and went black before rebooting itself. Just electromagnetic interference, Elena murmured, trying to convince herself. She'd seen this before in old buildings with faulty wiring, except there was no wiring here, no electricity at all. A soft sound caught her attention, like someone calling from far away. She strained to hear, wondering if it was just the wind. But there it was again, clearer now. Someone was whispering her name. Elena grabbed her flashlight, heart pounding as she shone it toward the sound. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating gravestones and trees, but nothing else. No people, no animals. Nothing that could have made that sound. Hello? She called out, her voice sounding small in the vastness of the cemetery. Is someone there? Only silence answered. Then her digital recorder, which she'd left running beside her, suddenly played back a voice. Not her own, not Kovach's. a voice that whispered, "We've been waiting for you, Elena." She nearly dropped the device. The recording continued, capturing nothing but the normal sounds of the night, until another whisper broke through so close it could have been someone speaking directly into the microphone. "Welcome to Ravenwood. You'll never want to leave." Elena spent the rest of the night huddled by the cemetery gate, her back pressed against the cold iron. Sleep was impossible after what she'd heard on the recorder. Every shadow seemed to move, every breeze carried whispers. When the first light of dawn finally broke across the horizon, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Birds began to sing, their cheerful notes oddly out of place in the somber graveyard. In the growing light, Ravenwood looked almost ordinary, just old stones and overgrown paths. Elena packed up her equipment with trembling hands, determined to review everything in the safety of daylight. At her small hotel room in the village, she connected her devices to her laptop. Most of the footage showed nothing unusual, just gravestones and trees swaying in the night breeze. But around midnight, the camera placed near the center of the cemetery had captured something strange. A faint glowing mist that seemed to rise from the ground and take shape before drifting out of frame. Even more disturbing were the audio recordings. Besides the whispers of her name, Elena could make out fragments of conversations as if she'd accidentally recorded people talking nearby. But there had been no one else in the cemetery, not supposed to be here. She can see the old rituals when the moon aligns. A knock at her door made her jump. Standing in the hallway was an older man with a neatly trimmed beard and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Dr. Reeves, I'm Professor Robert Bennett from the University History Department." He offered his hand. "Thomas Kovich said I might find you here. I understand you're researching Ravenwood Cemetery." Elena invited him in, grateful for human company after the long night. "Yes, I'm conducting a paranormal investigation. The cemetery has quite a reputation." "Indeed it does." Professor Bennett glanced at her laptop screen where the misty figure was paused. "I see you've already met some of the residents." Elena studied his face, looking for signs that he was mocking her. Finding none, she asked, "You believe the cemetery is haunted?" "I believe there are things in this world we don't fully understand yet." Bennett sat in the room's only chair. "I've been studying the history of this region for 30 years. Ravenwood has always been special." "Special how?" Elena turned the laptop so they could both see it. "Because I recorded voices last night. Clear voices responding to me." Bennett nodded, unsurprised. "The locals have stories going back centuries. Most historians dismiss them as folklore, but the consistency is remarkable. Have you visited the village archives yet?" Elena shook her head. She'd planned to focus on the physical evidence first. "We should go there now," Bennett suggested. "There are records that might explain what you experienced." An hour later, they sat in a small room at the back of the village library, surrounded by dusty ledgers and bound manuscripts. The archivist, a thin woman with glasses that magnified her eyes to owlish proportions, had been reluctant to grant them access until Bennett mentioned the university's generous donation program. "Here," Bennett said, carefully turning the brittle pages of a leather-bound book. "This is a record of the cemetery's founding in 1638. It mentions that before the land was consecrated as a Christian burial ground, it was a sacred site for the people who lived in this valley long before the current village was established." Elena leaned closer, squinting at the faded handwriting. "What kind of sacred site?" "The text is vague, but it suggests it was a place where they believed the boundary between the living and the dead was thinnest." Bennett turned another page. "There are references to annual rituals performed to communicate with ancestors, I believe. So the cemetery was built on ground already associated with the dead," Elena mused. "That could explain the high level of reported activity. Some researchers believe certain locations can act as focal points for paranormal energy." Bennett looked thoughtful. "There's more. During the Great Plague of 1665, this area was hit particularly hard. The death rate was so high that they ran out of space in the existing cemetery. He pulled out another book, this one filled with what looked like parish records. According to this, they created a mass grave in Ravenwood. Over 200 people were buried there in less than a month. Elena felt a chill. Where in the cemetery? The central area where the ground is highest. Bennett pointed to a crude map. Where you recorded that mist. Elena remembered what Kovac had said about the wealthy being buried closer to heaven. That doesn't explain why it's more active than other plague burial sites, though. Bennett hesitated, then lowered his voice. There's another record from the personal diary of the priest who oversaw the burials. It's disturbing. He carefully opened a smaller book, its cover stained and warped with age. He writes that as the plague worsened, people became desperate. They began bringing the sick to the burial site before they had died. What? Elena stared at him. You mean they buried people alive? Not exactly. They brought them to the edge of the mass grave when they showed symptoms, believing those close to death were already halfway to the other side and could carry messages to loved ones who had passed. Bennett turned a page. But the priest writes that some who were brought there recovered instead of dying. They claimed to have spoken with the dead during their fever dreams. Elena tried to process this. So the cemetery has a history of being used for communicating with the dead, even before the unusual plague practices. Exactly. Bennett closed the diary carefully. And there's one more thing you should know. The land Ravenwood was built on wasn't just any sacred site. According to local legends, it was a gate. A gate to what? The other side, whatever that means. Bennett gathered the books. The stories say the gate can open under certain conditions, when the stars align correctly. Elena thought of the whispered words on her recording. When the moon aligns, she felt the pieces starting to connect, forming a picture she wasn't sure she wanted to see clearly. As they left the archives, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the village square. Elena noticed how the villagers seemed to avoid, looking directly at Ravenwood Cemetery on the hill above them. I need to go back tonight, she said. Set up more equipment. Bennett frowned. That might not be wise. Whatever is happening there seems to be getting stronger. The patterns in the historical records suggest increased activity during this time of year. All the more reason to document it, Elena replied. Her scientific curiosity was overwhelming her fear now. Would you come with me? An extra pair of eyes would help. Bennett hesitated, then nodded. I'll meet you at the gates at sunset, but we stay together, and we leave if anything feels wrong. As they parted ways, Elena felt someone watching her. Turning, she saw a figure standing in the shadow of a building across the square. It was too far away to make out clearly, but something about its stillness made her uneasy. When she blinked, the figure was gone. That evening, Elena arrived at the cemetery gates early, bringing extra batteries and backup equipment. The sun was just beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She checked her watch. Bennett should arrive any minute. As she waited, Elena noticed something odd about one of the gravestones near the entrance. It seemed to shimmer slightly, as if seen through heat waves on a summer day. She approached it cautiously, camera in hand. The gravestone belonged to someone named Anna Fletcher, who had died in 1742. The dates and inscription were standard, but there was something carved at the bottom that caught Elena's attention, a small symbol like a circle with a line through it. It's a warding sign, said a voice behind her. Elena turned to find Bennett walking up the path carrying a small backpack. People used to carve them on graves to keep the spirits bound to their resting places, he explained. This cemetery has more of them than any other I've studied. Do you think they work? Elena asked half-jokingly. Bennett didn't smile. I think people wouldn't keep carving them if they didn't believe they were necessary. They set up equipment throughout the cemetery as the last light faded from the sky. Unlike the previous night, there was no moon. Clouds had rolled in, thick and heavy with the promise of rain. There, Elena said as she placed the final camera. We should be able to capture anything that happens tonight." As if on cue, a cold wind swept through the cemetery, rustling the leaves and making the branches creak. Elena's hair stood on end as she felt that same heavy presence from the night before, only stronger now. "Do you feel that?" she whispered to Bennett. He nodded, his face pale in the glow of their flashlights. "The air feels charged, like before a lightning storm." They made their way back to the entrance where Elena had set up a small monitoring station with her laptop. As they walked, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. Every few steps she would turn to look behind them, but the flashlight beam revealed nothing but gravestones and shadows. Just as they reached the gate, all of their equipment went dead simultaneously. Cameras, audio recorders, even their flashlights. The cemetery plunged into total darkness, and then in that perfect darkness, they heard footsteps on the gravel path behind them. Slow, deliberate footsteps, coming closer. Elena grabbed Bennett's arm in the darkness, both of them, frozen in place as the footsteps drew nearer. She fumbled with her flashlight, hitting it against her palm, but it remained stubbornly dark. "Hello?" Bennett called out, his voice steadier than Elena expected. "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped. For several heartbeats, there was only silence. Then a match flared in the darkness, illuminating the weathered face of Thomas Kovach. "I told you not to come at night," the old groundskeeper said, lighting a lantern he carried. Its warm glow pushed back the darkness in a small circle around them. Yet, here you are again. Elena let out a shaky breath. "Mr. Kovach, you scared us half to death." "Better half than completely," Kovach replied without humor. "Your machines won't work here tonight. The cemetery doesn't want to be recorded." Bennett stepped forward. "Thomas, you know me. I've studied this place for years. Something's different now, isn't it? Something's changed." Kovach's eyes shifted from Bennett to Elena, then to the darkness beyond. "It's getting close to midnight. We should leave." "Not yet," Elena insisted. "I need to understand what's happening here. All my equipment failing at once isn't normal." "Nothing about this place is normal," Kovach said. He hesitated, then sighed heavily. "Come with me. There's something you should see." He led them deeper into the cemetery, the lantern light creating shifting shadows that seemed to move independently among the gravestones. Elena noticed that Kovach avoided looking directly at certain graves, giving them a wide berth as they passed. They approached the oldest section of the cemetery, where the elaborate family crypts stood like small houses for the dead. Kovach stopped before one whose stone door was decorated with faded carvings. "This belongs to the Fletcher family," he explained. "The same family that founded this village." "I saw a Fletcher gravestone near the entrance," Elena said. "Anna Fletcher died 1742. Kovach nodded. "She was the last to be buried in this crypt. After her, they used regular graves. They said the crypt was full, but that wasn't the truth." He set down the lantern and pulled a large iron key from his pocket. The truth was, they sealed it because of what happened during Anna's funeral. The key turned with difficulty in the ancient lock. The stone door creaked open, revealing darkness beyond. Kovach picked up the lantern and held it forward, illuminating a narrow staircase leading down. The Fletchers were wealthy, Bennett explained as they descended. They could afford an underground chamber with multiple burial niches. The air grew colder with each step, and Elena could see her breath clouding in front of her. At the bottom of the stairs, the chamber opened up, revealing walls lined with stone shelves. Most held coffins in various states of decay, but it was what stood in the center of the room that made Elena gasp. A stone altar, rough and ancient-looking, stood in stark contrast to the carefully constructed burial niches. Symbols were carved into its surface, the same circle and line symbol she had seen on Anna Fletcher's grave, along with others she didn't recognize. "This was here before the crypt," Kovach said quietly. "Before the cemetery. The Fletchers built around it because they couldn't move it." Bennett approached the altar, studying the symbols with evident fascination. "These predate Christianity in this region. They're protection symbols, boundary markers." Boundary between what? Elena asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Life and death, Kovac replied. The living and the dead. He placed the lantern on the altar, its light reflecting off something metallic embedded in the stone. Elena leaned closer and saw a small bronze plaque with words in a language she didn't recognize. What does it say? She asked. It's a warning, Bennett translated, his finger tracing the ancient text. It says, "The gate opens when the heavens align. Seal it with blood freely given, or the dead will walk among the living." A sudden cold breeze extinguished the lantern, plunging them into total darkness. Elena felt her heart hammering in her chest. Then, as her eyes adjusted, she realized the chamber wasn't completely dark. A faint blue light emanated from the symbols on the altar. "They're glowing," she whispered. "It's happening again," Kovac said, his voice tight with fear. "We need to leave. Now." They hurried back up the stairs, the blue glow providing just enough light to see their way. As they emerged from the crypt, Elena noticed something strange about the night sky. The clouds had parted directly above the cemetery, revealing a patch of stars that seemed unusually bright. "The alignment," Bennett breathed, looking up. "It's beginning." All around them the cemetery had changed. A faint mist hung over the ground, swirling around their ankles. And in the distance, between the gravestones, shadowy figures moved. "Back to the gate," Kovac urged, pulling them along the path. "We need to get out before—" He stopped suddenly, clutching his chest, his face contorted in pain as he fell to his knees. "Mr. Kovac!" Elena knelt beside him. "What's wrong?" "My heart," he gasped. His eyes were wide with fear, but not for himself. He grabbed Elena's wrist with surprising strength. "Listen to me, the ritual. You must complete the ritual when the moon is directly overhead." "What ritual?" Elena asked desperately. "What are you talking about?" "The boundary is weakening," Kovac wheezed. "The gate. It must remain closed." His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed fully to the ground. Bennett was already calling for an ambulance on his phone, which had mysteriously begun working again. Elena checked Kovac's pulse. It was there, but weak and irregular. "They're coming," Bennett said, putting away his phone. "But it will take time to get up here." As if responding to his words, the mist around them thickened, and the shadowy figures in the distance began moving toward them. Elena could make out details now. People from different time periods, some in ancient clothing, others in more modern dress. All of them pale, with eyes that reflected the starlight like those of animals caught in headlights. "We need to get him to the gate," Elena said, trying to lift Kovac. Bennett helped her, and together they half-carried, half-dragged the unconscious groundskeeper along the path. The shadows moved parallel to them, never approaching directly but always visible from the corner of Elena's eye. "They're watching us," Bennett whispered. "Why aren't they stopping us?" "I don't think it's us they want," Elena replied, a terrible understanding dawning on her. "I think it's him." They finally reached the cemetery gate, laying Kovac down on the ground outside. In the distance, Elena could hear the wail of an ambulance siren. "We should wait here," Bennett said, looking back at the cemetery. The mist had stopped at the boundary as if held back by an invisible wall. The shadowy figure stood at the edge of it watching. Elena shook her head. "You stay with him. I need to go back." "What? Why?" "The ritual he mentioned. The alignment." Elena looked up at the sky. The patch of stars was shifting, and the edge of the moon was just becoming visible behind the clouds. "If what we've learned is true, something is going to happen at midnight when the moon is directly above the cemetery." "All the more reason to stay away," Bennett argued. "Elena, those things in there, they're not just ghosts or spirits, they're something else." "Exactly," Elena said. "And if the boundary between our world and theirs is weakening, we need to understand why. Kovac has been trying to tell us something important. The ritual, the gate, it all connects." The ambulance was getting closer. Elena made a quick decision. She grabbed her backup camera from her bag and shoved it into her pocket. When the Paramedics arrive, tell them he was talking about his heart medication before he collapsed. She instructed Bennett. Don't mention anything about rituals or gates. They'll think we're crazy. And what will you be doing? Bennett asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Going back to that altar, Elena replied. I need to see what happens at midnight. Bennett looked torn. You shouldn't go alone. Someone needs to stay with Kovich, Elena said. She checked her watch, 11:40 p.m. I'll be careful. If I'm not back by 12:30, call for help. Before Bennett could protest further, Elena slipped back through the cemetery gates. The mist swirled around her legs as she moved quickly along the path, heading toward the Fletcher crypt. The shadowy figures kept their distance, but she could feel their eyes following her. The crypt door remained open just as they had left it. The blue glow from the altar was visible even from the entrance, brighter now. Elena descended the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. In the chamber, the altar was transformed. The symbols carved into its surface pulsed with blue light, and the air around it shimmered like a heat mirage. Elena approached cautiously, her camera forgotten in her pocket, as she stared in wonder at the sight before her. The words on the bronze plaque seemed to shift and change as she watched, the ancient language rearranging itself into words she could understand. When stars and moon become as one, the veil between worlds thins to none. Blood of the living seals the door, or death walks free forevermore. Above her, through the open ceiling of the crypt, Elena could see the moon moving into position. It was almost midnight. The ritual needed to be completed, but she had no idea how to do it. And then she heard the whispers again, like the ones on her recording, but clearer now. Elena, help us. The door must be closed, before it's too late. Elena turned in, a slow circle trying to locate the source of the whispers. They seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the stone walls of the crypt. Who are you? She asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. What do you want me to do? The air in front of the altar shimmered and a figure gradually took shape, a woman in old-fashioned clothes, her form transparent but more solid than the shadowy figures outside. Her face was young, but her eyes held the wisdom of centuries. Name is Anna Fletcher, the apparition said, her voice like rustling leaves. This was once my family's crypt. Elena recognized the name from the gravestone near the entrance. You died in 1742. Anna nodded, a sad smile crossing her face. I died trying to complete the ritual, as others have before me. As others have since. What ritual? Elena asked, glancing at her watch. 11:50 p.m., 10 minutes until midnight. Kovich mentioned something about a gate that must remain closed. The gate is not a physical thing, Anna explained, gesturing to the altar. It's a thinning of the boundary between your world and ours. Every 50 years, when the stars align in a certain way, the boundary weakens. Those of us who remain here can cross over more easily. You mean ghosts can become more physical? Anna's expression hardened. Not just ghosts. There are other things in the darkness between worlds. Things that were never human. Things that hunger for life. A cold wind swept through the chamber, making the lantern flame dance wildly. Elena shivered, but whether from the cold or fear, she couldn't tell. The ritual strengthens the boundary, Anna continued. It must be performed exactly at midnight when the moon is directly overhead. My family protected this place for generations. When I died, the knowledge was nearly lost. But Kovich knows, Elena realized. That's why he's been the groundskeeper for so long. His family took over the duty from mine, Anna confirmed. He should be here now. He collapsed. His heart. Elena stepped closer to the altar. I'm here instead. Tell me what to do. Anna looked uncertain. It's dangerous for the uninitiated. The ritual requires blood freely given, a circle of protection, and the right words. Blood? Elena's mouth went dry. Just a few drops, Anna assured her. On the center of the altar. Elena checked her watch again. 11:55 p.m. What about the circle of protection? The words? I can guide you through them, Anna said. But you must hurry. Can you feel it? The boundary is already starting to fail. Now that Anna mentioned it, Elena could feel something changing in the air. It felt heavier, charged with electricity like before a thunderstorm. And there was a pressure building, as if something enormous was pushing against an invisible wall. Outside the crypt, a wind had risen, carrying with it the sound of whispers, hundreds of them now, overlapping, urgent. Through the open doorway, Elena could see the mist had grown thicker, swirling in patterns that almost formed faces before dissolving again. What happens if we don't complete the ritual in time? She asked, though she feared she knew the answer. The boundary will collapse completely, Anna said gravely. The dead will walk among the living, not just here, but everywhere the cemetery has a connection to, and worse things will follow. Worse things? Anna's form flickered. There's no time to explain. We must begin now. She guided Elena to draw a circle around the altar using a piece of chalk found in a niche in the wall. Then she instructed her to mark specific symbols at 4 points around the circle: north, south, east, and west. These are the ancient boundaries, Anna explained. They've been used since before my family came to this land. As Elena finished the last symbol, her watch beeped. Midnight. Through the opening above the crypt, she could see the moon perfectly, centered in the night sky, bathing the altar in silver light. Now the blood, Anna urged. Quickly. Elena hesitated for only a moment before taking a small pocket knife from her bag. She pricked her finger, wincing at the sharp pain, and let 3 drops of blood fall onto the center of the altar. Now repeat after me, Anna instructed, her form growing fainter as the moonlight intensified. Elena repeated the words Anna spoke, sounds that weren't quite any language she recognized but somehow felt ancient and powerful. As she spoke, the E symbols on the altar and those she had drawn on the ground began to glow more intensely. The wind outside howled now, and Elena could hear what sounded like dozens of people moving among the graves. Shadows passed by the crypt entrance, some human-shaped, others distorted into impossible forms. They know what we're doing, Anna said, her voice barely audible over the wind. They're trying to stop us. The final words of the ritual hung in the air as Elena spoke them. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the drops of blood on the altar began to glow with the same blue light as the symbols. The light spread outward, following the circle Elena had drawn until the entire pattern was illuminated. A beam of moonlight, impossibly focused, shot down through the opening above, striking the altar. The blue light and silver moonlight combined, creating a pulse of energy that expanded outward in a silent shockwave. Elena felt it pass through her body like a rush of cold water. Outside, the howling wind stopped abruptly. The whispers faded. Everything went quiet. Is it done? Elena asked, looking to Anna. But the ghost was fading rapidly. For now, Anna replied, her voice distant. The boundary is restored, but it won't last forever. In 50 years, the alignment will happen again. Someone must be here to perform the ritual. Wait, Elena called as Anna's form became almost transparent. I have so many questions. Find Kovac, Anna said, barely visible now. He knows more than he's told you, and be careful in the cemetery tonight. The ritual pushes them back, but some may still linger. With those final words, Anna Fletcher vanished completely. The blue light faded from the symbols, leaving the crypt dim except for the moonlight from above. Elena stood still for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Had she really just performed an ancient ritual to seal a supernatural boundary? Had she actually spoken with the ghost of a woman who died nearly 300 years ago? Her scientific mind struggled to rationalize the experience, but there was no denying what she had seen and felt. The world was stranger than she had ever imagined, and Ravenwood Cemetery stood at the center of that strangeness. She picked up the lantern and made her way back up the stairs, stepping carefully out into the cemetery. The mist had cleared, and the night was calm, too calm. No insects chirped, no nightbirds called. The entire cemetery felt like it was holding its breath. As Elena walked along the path toward the gate, she noticed subtle changes. The air felt lighter. The overwhelming sense of being watched had diminished. Whatever presence had been building before midnight had retreated, at least for now. She had almost reached the gate when she noticed something odd about one of the gravestones. In the moonlight, she could see fresh marks carved into its surface, the same protection symbols she had drawn around the altar. Looking around, Elena realized many of the stones had these marks, some old and weathered, others that appeared to have been recently refreshed. Kovac must have been maintaining them, keeping the boundary strong between ritual years. When she finally reached the cemetery gate, she found Bennett pacing anxiously. "Thank God," he said when he spotted her. "I was about to call for help." "What happened in there?" Elena opened her mouth to explain, then closed it again. How could she possibly describe what she had experienced? "It's complicated," she finally said. "How's Kovac?" "They took him to the hospital in the village. The paramedics said he was stable but needed tests." Bennett studied her face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Elena gave a tired laugh. "You have no idea." A police car pulled up beside them, its lights flashing but siren silent. The officer who stepped out looked between them with suspicion. "You the folks who called about the groundskeeper?" he asked. "What were you doing in the cemetery at this hour?" "Research," Elena replied quickly. "We're from the university. Mr. Kovac was showing us around when he collapsed." The officer didn't look convinced, but he nodded. "The hospital called. Kovac is awake and asking for you both, says it's urgent." Bennett and Elena exchanged glances. "We'll follow you there," Bennett told the officer. As they walked to their cars, Bennett whispered, "What really happened after I left?" Elena looked back at the cemetery one last time. In the moonlight, it looked peaceful, almost ordinary. But she knew better now. "I think I just helped prevent the apocalypse," she said. "But there's more to this story. Kovac has been keeping secrets, and it's time we learned what they are." Behind them, as the moon continued its path across the night sky, a single shadow moved among the gravestones, a reminder that not everything had been pushed back by the ritual. Something still walked in Ravenwood Cemetery, waiting for its chance to cross over completely. The village hospital was small, just a single-story building with a handful of rooms. At this late hour, the halls were quiet except for the occasional squeak of a nurse's shoes on the linoleum floor. Elena and Bennett followed the night nurse to Kovac's room at the end of the corridor. "He's been asking for you both," the nurse said in a hushed voice. "Doctor says his heart is stable now, but he needs rest. Try not to excite him." She opened the door to reveal Kovac lying in bed, hooked up to a heart monitor that beeped steadily. His weathered face looked paler than usual in the harsh hospital lighting, but his eyes were alert and focused. "You did it," he said as soon as he saw Elena. "It wasn't a question. I can feel it, the boundary is restored." Bennett closed the door behind them for privacy. "Thomas, you need to tell us everything now. No more secrets." Kovac sighed and adjusted himself on the pillows. "You're right. It's time you knew the whole truth." He gestured to a worn leather bag on the bedside table. "In there, my journal and the key." Elena opened the bag and pulled out an old, hand-bound journal and a small wooden box containing the iron key to the Fletcher crypt. "My family has been watching over Ravenwood for 10 generations, Kovac began. "When the Fletcher line ended, my ancestor took up their duty. Every 50 years when the stars align, the boundary between worlds thins to almost nothing. The ritual must be performed to restore it. I met Anna Fletcher," Elena said. "She guided me through the ritual." Kovac nodded, unsurprised. "She helps those who try to maintain the balance. She was the last of her family to attempt the ritual, but she failed. Died before she could complete it." "What happened that time?" Bennett asked. "When the ritual wasn't completed?" Kovac's expression darkened. The boundary collapsed completely. For 3 days, the dead walked freely in this village. 23 people died before a traveling priest managed to perform an emergency sealing. That's why this cemetery has its reputation. The boundary here has been damaged and repaired so many times that it's permanently weakened. Elena thought about the whispers she had heard, the shadows moving among the graves. Those things in the cemetery. They're not all human spirits, are they? No, Kovac confirmed. Some were never human. They're drawn to the weakened boundary like moths to a flame. They want to cross over to feed on the living. Bennett leaned against the wall, looking troubled. And this happens every 50 years? Why hasn't anyone documented it properly? Why? Isn't this common knowledge? Who would believe it? Kovac asked simply. Those who witness it either think they've gone mad or they dedicate themselves to keeping the secret, to preventing panic. My family chose the latter path. He gestured to the journal Elena was holding. Everything is in there. The history, the ritual, the signs to watch for. I've updated it with my own observations over the years. But why tell us now? Elena asked. The ritual is complete. The boundary is secure again. Kovac's face grew solemn. Because I won't be here for the next alignment. I'm an old man, and my heart is failing. I have no children to pass the duty to. Someone must take up the watch. Elena and Bennett exchanged looks. The implication was clear. You want one of us to become the new guardian, Bennett said slowly. Both of you, ideally, Kovac replied. The duty is easier with more shoulders to bear it, and you've both seen the truth now. You know what's at stake. Before either could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Raised voices, hurried footsteps, and then the door burst open. A young nurse stood there, her face pale with shock. You need to see this, she said, turning on the small television mounted in the corner of the room. The local news was showing footage of Ravenwood Cemetery. Despite the late hour, the reporter looked wide awake, her expression a mix of excitement and fear as she stood at the cemetery gates. We're live at Ravenwood Cemetery, where witnesses report seeing strange lights and figures moving among the graves just after midnight, she was saying. Local residents called police after several people claimed to see what they described as glowing people walking through the cemetery gates and into the village. The camera panned to show several villagers being interviewed, all telling similar stories of seeing transparent figures moving down the road from the cemetery toward the village center. Oh no, Kovac whispered, struggling to sit up. It wasn't enough. The ritual was incomplete. That's impossible, Elena protested. I did everything Anna told me to do. Kovac's monitor began beeping faster as his heart rate increased. The 50-year alignment is stronger than usual this time. A simple ritual might not be enough to fully restore the boundary. The nurse rushed to his side. Please, he needs to stay calm. We need to go back, Bennett said to Elena. Now, Elena nodded, placing the journal and key back in the leather bag. We'll fix this, Mr. Kovac. Rest and get better. We'll handle it. Kovac caught her wrist before she could leave. Be careful. The ones who escaped, they'll be more powerful tonight than they've been in decades. They'll resist being sent back. Outside the hospital, the village was in chaos. People stood in the streets pointing toward the cemetery hill where strange lights flickered among the graves. Police cars blocked the road leading up to Ravenwood, their lights casting red and blue streaks across the worried faces of onlookers. We won't be able to drive up there, Bennett observed. We'll have to go on foot. Elena slung Kovac's bag over her shoulder. There must be another way. A back path or something. Bennett thought for a moment. There is. Through the woods on the east side. Locals use it as a shortcut. They made their way through the village, avoiding the growing crowds. The path, Bennett remembered, was barely visible, overgrown with thorny bushes that tore at their clothes as they pushed through, but it led steadily uphill, toward the eastern wall of the cemetery. Look, Elena whispered as they neared the top. From their vantage point, they could see into Ravenwood. The mist had returned, thicker than before, swirling in unnatural patterns across the grounds. And moving through the mist were dozens of glowing figures. Some looked like normal people, others were distorted, their forms shifting and changing as they moved. They're leaving the cemetery, Bennett said, pointing to a section of wall that had crumbled. Several of the apparitions were passing through the gap, heading down toward the village. Elena pulled out Kovac's journal, flipping through it frantically by the light of her phone. There must be something in here about what to do if the ritual fails. We don't have time to read it all, Bennett said, eyeing the spirits that were steadily moving toward the village. We need to act now. Elena stopped on a page with a drawing that looked like the altar in the Fletcher crypt. Beneath it were notes in Kovic's careful handwriting. In case of emergency, the secondary seal. There's a backup plan, she said, scanning the page. A secondary ritual that can be performed if the primary one fails, but it needs to be done at the original altar and… She paused, her face growing pale. It requires more blood. A lot more. Bennett looked grim. How much more? Not fatal amounts, Elena clarified quickly, but enough that whoever does it will be weakened, and it has to be done by someone who is already connected with the spirits. That's you, Bennett said. You spoke with Anna Fletcher. Elena nodded, closing the journal. We need to get to the Fletcher crypt without being seen by those things. They climbed over the cemetery wall and crept from gravestone to gravestone, using them as cover. The spirits seemed preoccupied with their newfound freedom, drifting through the cemetery in groups. Some looked confused, others purposeful. None seemed to notice the two living people in their midst, until one did. A figure separated from a nearby group. A tall, gaunt shape that had once been a man. Unlike the others, his eyes fixed directly on Elena and Bennett. He changed direction, moving toward them with deliberate steps. Run, Bennett whispered. Straight to the crypt. Don't look back. They broke cover, sprinting between the graves. Behind them, the spirit let out a wail that was picked up by others. Soon, multiple figures were in pursuit, their forms gliding effortlessly over the uneven ground. The Fletcher crypt loomed ahead, its door still open from their earlier visit. Elena and Bennett ducked inside, slamming the heavy stone door behind them. Bennett braced himself against it as something on the other side began to push. I can't hold this forever, he grunted. Do what you need to do. Elena hurried down the stairs to the underground chamber. The altar still stood in the center, the symbols now dark and dormant. She pulled out Kovic's journal again, finding the page with the secondary ritual. The instructions were clear but daunting. She would need to remake the circle, but with more complex symbols. And instead of 3 drops of blood, this ritual required a shallow cut across the palm, enough to leave a handprint on the altar stone. She worked quickly, redrawing the circle with the chalk, adding the new symbols as shown in the journal. Outside, she could hear the spirits trying to force their way into the crypt. Bennett's strained voice called down to her. Whatever you're doing, hurry. Elena finished the circle and stood before the altar. She took a deep breath, then used Kovic's pocket knife to cut across her palm. The pain was sharp and immediate, but she didn't hesitate. She pressed her bleeding hand to the center of the altar and began to recite the words written in the journal. The language was the same as before, but the cadence was different, more commanding, less like a request and more like an order. As she spoke, the blood on the altar began to glow, brighter than before, spreading outward through the stone as if alive. Above her, the stone door of the crypt shattered. Bennett tumbled down the stairs, landing hard at the bottom as spectral forms began to pour into the opening. Elena, he shouted in warning. But she didn't stop the ritual. The final words left her lips just as the first spirit reached the bottom of the stairs. The blood handprint on the altar flared with blinding light, and a shockwave of energy burst outward, stronger than the one before. The spirits caught in its path screamed, a sound of fury and despair, as they were pushed backward, their forms dissipating like smoke in a strong wind. The wave continued outward through the walls of the crypt, across the cemetery, down into the village. When the light faded, Elena found herself on her knees, her strength drained. Bennett was at her side, helping her up. Did it work? She asked, weakly. They climbed the broken stairs and emerged into the cemetery. The mist was gone. The spirits were gone. The night was still and peaceful under the watching moon. I think it did, Bennett said, looking around in wonder. You did it, Elena. In The distance, they could see the village returning to normal. The police lights still flashed, but the crowds were dispersing. People returning to their homes as if waking from a strange dream. They'll rationalize it, Elena said, bandaging her hand with a handkerchief. Gas leaks, mass hysteria, anything but the truth. And what is the truth? Bennett asked softly. What do we tell people about what happened here? Elena looked out over Ravenwood Cemetery, a place that would never seem ordinary to her again. In 50 years, the alignment would return. The boundary would weaken once more. Someone would need to be here to perform the ritual. We tell them what Kovacs' family has been telling them for generations, she replied. That Ravenwood is the most haunted cemetery in the world, a place where the spirits still walk. She patted the journal in her bag. And we make sure we're ready when they try to walk again. As they made their way down to the village, neither noticed the figure watching from the shadows of a distant grave, the transparent form of Thomas Kovacs, a gentle smile on his face as he nodded in approval. His duty was past. The cemetery had new guardians now. Then, as the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky, he faded away, finally at peace, knowing Ravenwood's secret was in good hands.